a mother who has dedicated her entire life to her family, only to have that sacrifice met with coldness and betrayal. When her only son turns his back on her due to a terrible secret hidden for years, she is left with an unhealable pain. In this unforgiving battle, what will Maggie Thompson do when even the husband she trusted most sides with her son? This is not just a story of love and sacrifice. It is also a bitter verdict on the painful decisions one must make when a woman is forced to face betrayal within the very walls of her home. Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. My name is Maggie Thompson. I'm 62 years old. And what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. The courtroom was cold, the harsh light shining down from the glaring ceiling lamps, creating an impersonal, detached atmosphere. Every small sound echoed clearly, from the sound of my shoes walking to the rustling of paper as someone else moved. I stood there, feeling as though the air was thickening with each passing moment, pressing down on my chest. Everything around me was too bright, too white, as if to prevent me from escaping the truth. This room had no place for emotions. It only had dry paperwork, emotionless verdicts, and people standing over me, observing me as though I were an inanimate object. I walked into the room, my legs trembling slightly, but I didn't let anyone see. Each step echoed in the silent space, like a reminder of the loneliness I was facing. The gaze of everyone seemed to be fixed on me, but I couldn't bring myself to look at them. I couldn't look at Ryan, my son, or Tasha, my daughter-in-law. I felt their coldness, as if they were no longer my family. They were strangers, standing here, waiting for me to fall. Ryan stood in a corner of the room with Tasha, his gaze unmoving. I could feel the contempt in his eyes, as if I were no longer his mother. We had once shared a close, intimate bond, but now it seemed like everything had changed. Tasha stood next to Ryan, her eyes glaring at me with disdain, her lips pressed tight. She said nothing, but I could feel the hatred in every movement of hers. "She looks pathetic," I heard Tasha whisper, clearly trying to make sure I could hear. I didn't respond. I just stood there, taking deep breaths, trying to hold myself together. I couldn't let them see me weak. Had I ever been weak? I had raised Ryan on my own after my husband passed away, struggled alone to raise him so he could stand on his own feet. I had poured all my love and energy into my son. But now, this betrayal, this coldness from the very child I had loved all my life, how could I face it? "Just get this over with," Ryan said, his voice devoid of emotion. That sentence hit me like a punch to the heart. Shouldn't he feel something? At least a little regret? But no, he just wanted it all to end quickly. And I knew that, to him, I was just a burden to be discarded. I sat down at the defendant's table, my fingers trembling slightly as I placed them on the cold surface. The lights from the lamps shone directly at me, as if they were trying to expose every crack in my soul. I looked down, and in my mind, there was only one question. How did I end up here? I had devoted my life to my family, sacrificed everything to raise my children, yet now I was forced to stand here, like a criminal, before the people I once loved most. "Mrs. Thompson?" The judge called my name, his voice stern, devoid of any compassion. "Do you understand the proceedings today?" I nodded slightly, trying to steady my voice, but my heart was pounding uncontrollably. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, my voice a little choked. I understand. I understand more than anyone else. The judge looked at me for a long moment, then turned his gaze to Ryan and Tasha, as if seeking an answer from them. But I knew none of them would understand me. None of them would understand the pain I was going through. Ryan, my son, was now standing with Tasha, the woman I never thought would push my son this far away. We will need evidence of her incapacity, the judge continued, his voice indifferent to my emotions. Those words were like a slap in the face, confirming that I was no longer myself, that I no longer had the strength to make decisions about my own life. I felt a chill run down my spine. Incapacity? How could they say that about me? How could they say this about the mother who had spent her entire life caring for her children, raising them? I wanted to stand up, shout at them that I was still lucid, that I still had life in me. But I couldn't. I had to stay silent. She will need to provide supporting evidence for this accusation, the judge said. But I couldn't hear his words clearly anymore. The world seemed to be shattering around me. I didn't know how much longer I could stand. I looked down, not daring to look at Ryan. Not because I feared him, but because I didn't want to face the truth that I had failed in his eyes. How could I start over from here? How could I fight when my own son had turned his back on me? But then, something within me stirred, a strength I didn't know where it came from. I couldn't let them win. Not now. Not in this battle. I wouldn't let them defeat me without a fight. And if I had to fight to the end, I would. Not for me, but for Ryan, for the love I had given him. I lifted my head, looking directly at the judge, then turned back to Ryan once more. I couldn't let them see me weak. I would fight for what I believed was right. I wouldn't let them strip away my dignity, not like this. I could feel the tension in the air, as if something was building up, waiting to explode. But I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready to face it all. The courtroom remained a cold, silent space. The harsh light from the ceiling lamps, like sharp blades, shone directly onto the table, highlighting the stern, indifferent faces that showed no sympathy. The sounds of flipping papers, the scratching of pens on paper, and the rhythmic tapping of the judge's gavel echoed like distant echoes in this lifeless space. This was a place of punishment, where emotions had no place. This was where I stood, alone, among the people who didn't care about me. Ryan and Tasha were still standing there, not far from me. It felt as though they had no connection to me anymore, no concern or affection left for me. Ryan, my son, stood upright, expressionless, his eyes empty, no longer having any feeling toward his mother. I had devoted my entire life and heart to him. But now, he stood there like a stranger. Tasha, my daughter-in-law, stood beside him, still wearing a cold, sharp expression. She didn't look at me, but I could feel the contempt in every movement she made. Every time she looked at me, it was as if she were looking at a mortal enemy. "She looks pathetic," I clearly heard Tasha whisper, intentionally loud enough for me to hear. She wasn't the first to look down on me, but this time, it felt like all those words were piercing through me, cutting into my flesh, leaving a wound that could never heal. Her words were like a sharp blade slicing into my heart. I could feel the pain in every word, but I wouldn't let myself react. Not now, not here. I couldn't let them see me weak. I couldn't give them another reason to mock me. I had lived a life full of hardships, raising my son, dedicating all my time and effort to my family. Yet now, I was being turned away by the very people I loved most. "Just get it over with," Ryan said, his voice steady, emotionless, without a hint of regret. That sentence hit me like a stab to the heart. How could he say that? How could he turn his back on me like this? He had once been a loving child, always coming to his mother when things were tough. But now, I was nothing in his eyes. I was no longer the mother he once loved and protected. A pain rose in me, but I wouldn't let it show. I couldn't let them see my weakness. I had become too familiar with pain in my life to allow myself to collapse. But when I looked at Ryan, my heart felt like it was being squeezed. How could I accept that my son was standing here, saying those words to me? I tried to move toward the defendant's table, my legs heavy, each step feeling like I was carrying 1,000 pounds. As I sat down, I placed my hands on the cold table. My fingers trembled, but I wouldn't allow myself to show any sign of weakness. I had to hold strong, not for me, but because I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them make me fall. Judge Walker, who was sitting before me, didn't look at me with sympathy. His gaze was stern, cold. "Mrs. Thompson," the judge called, his voice like nails being hammered into me. "Do you fully understand the proceedings today?" I didn't answer immediately. I had to regain my composure. Took a deep breath to keep my emotions in check. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, my voice trembling slightly, but I made an effort to stay firm. I understand better than anyone else." The judge showed no sign of compassion. He looked at me for a moment before turning his attention back to the papers on the desk. He didn't look at me as a mother, but as a defendant, being questioned on her ability to make decisions. His words felt like a breeze passing by, as if he couldn't see me, couldn't hear me. He only saw me as an old, frail woman, incapable of making decisions about her own life. "We will need evidence of her incapacity," the judge continued. Those words felt like sharp thorns stabbing into my heart. How could they say that I was incapable? How could they treat me as weak, unable to manage my own life? I felt a cold chill run down my spine, but I couldn't let that fear take hold of me. I couldn't let them win. Not here, not in this fight. I had spent my whole life raising Ryan, and I wouldn't let a piece of paper or a verdict take away everything I had built. The judge kept demanding more evidence from me. I knew I had to do something to prove that I still had the ability to make decisions. I had lived a life of constant struggle, from the difficult days when my husband passed away to raising Ryan alone. I couldn't let my efforts be buried under doubt and contempt from my own son. The papers on the table in front of me seemed to blur. Each word on them felt like a wound bleeding. I couldn't see clearly what was in front of me, but I knew I couldn't lose this battle. Not for me, but for everything I had given to my family. I could feel the tension in the air. Each passing second was a test of my strength. I knew that if I didn't fight now, I would lose everything. Not just the house, not just the property, but my respect, my dignity. I couldn't let Ryan and Tasha win. I couldn't let them take everything I had painstakingly built. But in those moments, another memory unexpectedly flashed in my mind. I remembered a day long ago when Ryan and I sat together under the warm yellow light in the small kitchen, and I taught him how to cook a simple dish. He was just a little boy then, but his eyes were full of love and trust. "Mom, I did it right?" Ryan asked, his voice full of excitement. "You did great, Ryan." I smiled, patting his shoulder. I'm proud of you. Those memories, those sweet moments, now felt like a part of the past. A part that I didn't know if I could hold on to anymore. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't let Ryan forget the love and sacrifices I had given him. No matter what, I wouldn't let him lose himself. The courtroom remained the same. But now, the coldness in the air seemed to consume every cell in my body. The harsh white light from the ceiling lamps cast cold rays down, marking the table, the walls, as if trying to illuminate every corner of my soul. Everything around me blurred. Now, I could no longer clearly see who was sitting around me. All I could see was the coldness in the eyes of Ryan and Tasha as they stared at me. Those gazes were like daggers, sharp and unforgiving. Tasha stood next to Ryan, her gaze unwavering. She didn't even bother to look at me, standing there with a victorious expression, as if life now belonged to her. She had done everything to take what I had built. And Ryan, my son, whom I had raised since he was a child, now stood there, not looking at me, not offering a single word of apology, no look of sympathy. He stood there like a stranger, someone who no longer belonged to me. She looks pathetic, I heard Tasha whisper, her voice clear in this room, not even attempting to hide her contempt. Tasha didn't need to say much. She knew that I could hear every word she uttered, and I knew that she wanted me to feel weak, to sense the satisfaction in every word she spoke. But I couldn't let her see the pain in me. I had become too accustomed to enduring these harsh words. I didn't look at Ryan, but I could feel his gaze on me from a distance. He stood there, strong, but I saw the coldness in his look. It wasn't hatred or animosity, but indifference, as though I was no longer his mother. Everything I had done for him, everything I had sacrificed for him, no longer mattered. We were no longer anything to each other, and I didn't know what I could do to change that. How could I face the truth that my son had become someone I didn't recognize? The judge, still sitting silently, looked at the papers in front of him, showing no sign of sympathy. It was as though he were reviewing a simple case, unaware that for me, this was a battle to preserve my dignity, my honor, and my heart. Mrs. Thompson, the judge began, his voice cutting through the space, cold and unchanging. Do you have anything to say in defense of these accusations? Each word from him was like a direct blow to me. How could I defend myself when I didn't even know why everything had come to this point? What had I done wrong? How could I fight when my own son stood with the betrayer? How could I prove that I wasn't incapacitated when the very people I loved most treated me this way? I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. I had to fight, even though I didn't know what I had left to hold on to. I have no defense, I said, my voice soft but not lacking in determination. I can't speak for my son's actions because I don't recognize him anymore. These words felt like a confession. How could I accept that my son could do such things? How could I admit that I had failed in raising him? Ryan wasn't the child I had raised. He was no longer the one I had loved unconditionally. Do you have anything to say about your son's actions? The judge continued, not hurried, but in his question, I sensed sarcasm. I couldn't answer this question. I couldn't say I understood why Ryan was acting this way, because I couldn't understand. How could I accept that my son was doing this to his mother? It felt like I was being cornered, unable to escape. What had I done wrong? I had sacrificed everything to raise Ryan, to protect him from mistakes. And now, I had to face a truth I couldn't change. The judge's questions were like daggers cutting into me, making me feel like I had nothing left to hold on to. I looked at my hands, feeling the exhaustion in every finger, and I knew I couldn't give up. I wouldn't let them take everything I had built. "Can you provide any further evidence?" the judge asked next. His question felt like another slap in the face. How could I continue fighting when I didn't even know what I had left to protect? I had lost my son. I had lost the love I had for this family, and now I had to face a battle I couldn't win. Tasha stood next to Ryan, still saying nothing. She didn't need to speak. She only needed to stand there, look at me, and that was enough. I could feel the satisfaction in her eyes. She needed nothing more than to see me fall, to see me fail. And Ryan, my son, couldn't even look at me. He stood silently, but I could feel the alienation in his eyes. He wasn't the child I had raised. He was no longer the one I had loved unconditionally. "I have nothing else to prove," I said, my voice more decisive. "I did everything I could to protect this family, but I can't protect myself when my own son turns his back on me." The judge looked at me, his expression unchanged. He didn't understand. He didn't understand that I had dedicated my entire life to this family, to Ryan. He didn't understand that I had sacrificed everything, from personal joy to my own dreams, just to protect him. But now, I was standing here, with everything I had, and I had to face the truth that I couldn't protect myself from my own son. Ryan and Tasha didn't say anything more, and I felt a silence rise, engulfing the space. Everything seemed to spin around me, and I couldn't escape. But I wouldn't let them win. I would fight to the end, because I am Maggie Thompson, and I wouldn't let everything I've done be taken from me without a fight. The scene in the courtroom remained unchanged. The white light from the ceiling lamps still cast cold, impersonal rays down, slicing through the air. The light cut through the walls, making everything too clear, too sharp, as if nothing could be hidden in this space. The sound of pens tapping lightly on the table, papers being flipped, and small noises in the room all rang out clearly, making me feel as though I were standing under a web of interrogation. Tasha and Ryan still stood together, not a word, not a glance in my direction. I could feel their coldness, their indifference, and their complete disregard for me. Tasha didn't look at me, but I knew she felt victorious, standing in a position where she believed she had the right to see me as a loser. Ryan didn't say anything, but I could sense the apathy in his eyes. He was no longer the son I once loved. He was no longer the person I had raised over the years. My heart felt as if it was being torn apart when I looked at them. They were no longer my family. Tasha was no longer the daughter-in-law I had welcomed, and Ryan was no longer the son I had loved unconditionally. Everything I had done for them was now meaningless, a fading memory. "She doesn't have the capacity to make decisions anymore," I heard Tasha whisper. Even though she tried to keep her voice low, I could still hear each word clearly. She wanted me to know that she had won, that I had failed. But I couldn't let her see my weakness. I had to fight, even though I felt I had nothing left to protect. "Mrs. Thompson, can you explain your capacity to make decisions?" the judge asked, his voice cold, but it seemed curious. I could see in his eyes the doubt, the lack of trust, as if he were waiting for me to crumble, but I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let the judge or anyone in this room think I had lost my clarity. I sat in silence for a moment, feeling as though every word was stuck in my throat. "I can explain," I said, my voice steady but firm. "But I don't need to prove anything to them. I have lived a life raising Ryan, giving my heart and energy to this family. I cannot accept that everything I've done is now in question." The judge did not react, simply continuing to write in his notebook. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I knew I couldn't stop now. I had fought all my life, from being a wife to being a single mother, facing the hardships of raising my son. Every day, every month, every year, I fought to create a happy family, to protect Ryan from the storms of life. Yet now, all I received in return was coldness and contempt. "You will need to prove that you are capable of making decisions about your own assets," the judge continued, his voice lacking any compassion. Those words were like a stab to my heart. How could I prove this when my own son stood with the betrayer? How could I protect myself when even my closest family members turned their backs on me? I looked down at the papers in front of me. The documents I had spent hours preparing. The words on them no longer seemed clear. Everything was fading, as if my efforts were slowly being erased. I had done everything. I had sacrificed so much. But now, I had to stand here, enduring the judgment from those I had loved. I had protected them. I had given up everything to keep this family together. And now, it was all crumbling before my eyes. But I couldn't let this failure destroy me. I couldn't. If I didn't fight, I would lose everything. I would lose my son. And I couldn't let that happen. I had already lost too much. "Can you provide any further evidence about your condition?" the judge asked again, but his tone no longer held the patience it had before. I could feel a change in his eyes, a lack of conviction, a weariness. Perhaps he no longer saw me as a mother, but as a loser, a woman who no longer had the strength to defend herself. "I don't need to provide anything more," I replied, my voice stronger, as if I were trying to convince myself. "I have done everything I can to protect this family, and I won't let it be taken away by a piece of paper or an unfair decision." Tasha looked at me from a distance, her eyes never leaving me. She didn't say a word, just stood there, silently. But I could feel the satisfaction in her eyes. She had won in her own mind. She didn't need to say anything else. But I wouldn't let her win. I wouldn't let Tasha take everything I had done for this family. Ryan still stood silently, not looking at me, not saying a word. I wanted to look into his eyes, to feel some love in them, but I couldn't. He didn't look at me anymore. There was no trace of the son who had loved his mother. He had changed, and I couldn't change that. "Do you have anything to say about your son's condition?" the judge asked. And I felt in his question a gentle curiosity about me. But I couldn't answer. I couldn't say anything about Ryan. I couldn't speak about his actions because I no longer recognized him. I no longer recognized the son I had devoted my entire life to. "I can't say anything anymore," I said. My voice choked, but I couldn't remain silent. Ryan is no longer my son. He has changed, and I can't accept that. This time, the judge didn't take any more notes. He just nodded slightly and turned back to look at the documents. The whole room fell silent. No one spoke. It was just me and the chaotic emotions inside me. "Can you provide anything else about your assets?" the judge asked. But I no longer had the strength to answer. All I had were the papers, the documents I had prepared over the past weeks. But I knew they might not be enough. Not enough to protect my family. not enough to protect the love I had for Ryan. It felt as though I were standing on the edge of an abyss, with no way out. I had done everything, sacrificed everything. But now, I had to face the truth. The people I loved most no longer needed me. I couldn't go back after what happened in the courtroom that day. Everything felt frozen in my mind. The judge's questions, the cold stares from Ryan and Tasha, kept swirling in my thoughts, making it impossible to escape them. I wondered if I had done something wrong. Had I spoiled Ryan too much? Had I sheltered him too much, only for him to now turn against me and side with the betrayer? How could I endure this betrayal? As I left the courtroom, everything seemed blurry, no longer clear as it once was. It felt like I was walking into another world, one where I no longer had the right to decide my own life. All I had were memories, words, and the tears I had shed for Ryan over the years. But now, it all seemed to crumble. I couldn't understand my son anymore. I couldn't understand why he would treat me this way. When I got home, the silence in the house made me feel more alone than ever. There was no laughter from Ryan, no intimate conversations between mother and son. This house used to be where we shared happy moments, cozy evenings together. But now, all of it was just memories, things that were lost. I walked into the living room, sat down on the sofa, and clenched my hands tightly. The loneliness crept over me, as if I were left alone in this world. "Can you forgive me, Mom?" That question still echoed in my mind every night. Ryan's voice, when he was little, looking at me with bright, loving eyes, full of trust. Back then, I told him I would always protect him, that I would always love him, no matter what happened. But now, I couldn't protect him anymore. I couldn't protect him from the mistakes he had made on his own, and that hurt more than anything else. I remembered the days Ryan and I spent together, when he was just a child, when we were together, with no barriers between us. I loved him with all my heart, did everything for him. When he faced difficulties, I was always there by his side, helping him overcome every challenge. But now, I had to face his indifference, his coldness. How could I bear that? Tasha, my daughter-in-law, didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with contempt, as though I were an object of no value. She didn't need to say anything more. Just standing there, beside Ryan, she had taken everything I had built. She had destroyed this family, made me lose my son. And Ryan, instead of standing by me, stood by her, ignoring all the sacrifices I had made for him. The questions kept circling in my mind, the doubts about myself making it impossible for me to stay calm. Am I a failure as a mother? Did I go wrong in raising Ryan? If I hadn't protected him so much, would things have turned out differently? What did I do wrong? Everything felt like a never-ending loop with no way out. At night, I sat alone in the living room, looking at the family photos, the old photos, when Ryan was just a boy, when we were happy together. Those photos now only made my heart ache. The memories of a happy family, of unconditional love, were now just a past. Everything had changed. Those memories were now deep wounds in my heart, wounds that could never heal. I remembered when Ryan first left home to go to school far away. At that time, I was so worried that I couldn't sleep the whole night. I feared he would face difficulties, that he wouldn't be strong enough to face the world outside. But when he came back, I saw maturity in his eyes. I felt that I had done right, that he could take care of himself. But now, When he stood by Tasha, no longer looking at me with love, I wondered if I had really done right by raising him this way. The guilt kept haunting me. I couldn't escape the thought that maybe I had done wrong. Maybe I had sheltered him too much, not letting him stand on his own. But I can't change the past. I can't change what has happened. All I can do is face the present with what is happening now. And even though it's difficult, I know what I must do next. I have to find a way to protect myself, to protect what is left of this family. The next day, I went to meet lawyer Martin. He was the only one who could help me in this battle. I couldn't fight Ryan and Tasha on my own. But I still felt a little scared when I walked into his office. I felt like a failure, like someone who no longer had the ability to take care of her own life. But I couldn't let myself collapse. I had fought all my life, and I wouldn't give up. Martin listened as I spoke. Then he began explaining what we needed to do to protect my rights. Every word he spoke was comforting, but I couldn't relax. I knew this battle wouldn't be easy, and I knew that even if I won, I would never be able to erase the wounds in my heart. I would never be able to regain Ryan's trust. Maggie, we'll have to face some big challenges, Martin said, looking at me with a sympathetic gaze. But I'll help you. You're not alone in this fight. I looked at him, but deep down, I couldn't stop feeling guilty. Maybe I had loved Ryan too much, sheltered him too much, to the point where I didn't know what to do to fix things now. But I couldn't keep drowning in guilt. I had to fight, because I am Maggie Thompson, and I won't let Ryan or anyone else take away everything I've spent my life building. The next day, I woke up in a room filled with darkness, without the usual light of dawn. The world outside my window continued to turn, but I felt like I was in another world, one filled with loneliness and pain. My footsteps on the cold floor, my fingers unable to grasp anything firmly anymore. Everything seemed to slip away from me. The feeling of being lost crept into my heart, and I knew that no matter how hard I tried, I could never retrieve the peace I had lost. This house, which had once been where Ryan and I were close, once a home, now only had cracks left. No more laughter from Ryan, no more simple conversations every morning. Everything was just silence. I sat down on the couch in the living room, my tired eyes staring at the old family photos, the ones I had always cherished as beautiful memories of my life. But now, looking at them, I only felt emptiness. I thought about the early days when Ryan was a little boy. Every step he took was a source of pride for me. I remembered when he learned to walk, to talk, the first moments in life that I was there to witness. At that time, I thought nothing could ever tear us apart, that my love for him was unconditional and everlasting. But now, that unconditional feeling was fading, replaced by pain, by betrayal that I couldn't even comprehend. Tasha. She stood next to Ryan, her gaze smug, not hiding her satisfaction at seeing me suffer. I couldn't understand why she treated me this way. She had come into our lives with a smile, and I had welcomed her as a daughter-in-law. But now, I saw her as an ambitious, scheming woman. She had pulled Ryan away from me, made him a stranger to the love I had given him. Every time I thought of her, hatred surged within me, but I couldn't let that hatred consume me, because I still had to face Ryan. Ryan, my son. He had changed, and I didn't know why. He was no longer the innocent child who trusted his mother. He was no longer the one who would come back when things were hard, no longer the one who needed my protection. I couldn't imagine that. How could a mother accept such a change in her son? How could I face the truth that the child I had loved, cared for, and raised for so many years now turned his back on me? The memories of times I played with Ryan, of us getting through the difficulties in life together, now felt like open wounds that hadn't healed. I had taught him how to get up after every fall, but now I had to get up on my own, facing a pain that I couldn't resolve. I felt like I had failed. How could I keep fighting when everything I had done seemed to hold no value? When I started going through the family photos, an old picture fell out of the album. It was a photo from a beach trip many years ago, when Ryan was still a child. He was standing beside me, the two of us smiling at the camera, as though nothing could ever tear us apart. Looking at that photo, I remembered the times he would run to me, seeking comfort when he faced difficulties. I remembered the innocent words he said. "Mom, I love you." But now, I could no longer hear those words. He didn't say them to me anymore. I put the photo down on the table and tears began to fall. I couldn't hold on to my strength anymore. I had tried so hard, but now I felt like I had lost this battle. Not because I didn't love Ryan, but because I couldn't make him understand that I had done everything for him. I had lived a life of sacrifice for him, but now I had to face a betrayal I couldn't comprehend. "Mom, I love you." Ryan's words echoed in my head again, but now I didn't hear them from him. I could no longer feel that love in his eyes. Had I done wrong? Was I a failure as a mother? All those questions kept swirling in my mind, making it impossible for me to stop. After hours of silent reflection, I decided to do something I had been avoiding for so long. I took the old phone, the one Ryan and I used to stay in touch whenever he was away, and I called lawyer Martin. I knew I had to continue this fight, even though I didn't know how much strength I had left. But I also knew I couldn't give up. Not for me, but for Ryan. I still loved him, and I wouldn't let him lose his way. "We need to prepare more evidence about your financial situation," Martin said when I called him. "You'll need clear documents to prove that you still have the capacity to make decisions." I knew what he was saying was true. Without evidence, I couldn't fight. But what could I do when Ryan no longer saw me the same way? How could I fight when the person I loved most no longer believed in me? I felt exhausted, not just physically but mentally as well. But I couldn't give up. Not for me, but for everything I had given to this family. I had loved Ryan unconditionally, and now I would fight not for myself, but for him. I couldn't let my son continue to live in indifference, in estrangement from his own mother. I decided to gather all the necessary documents, to sort through what was left in this house. Every piece of paper, every document could be something I needed to fight. I knew this battle wouldn't be easy, but I wouldn't give up. I wouldn't let Tasha and Ryan win. I had to protect what I had built. The tension in the courtroom that day felt like a ticking time bomb. No one knew when it would explode, but everyone could feel the anticipation, the suffocating pressure in the air. Each question from the judge felt like a punch to my gut, and with each passing moment, the fatigue in my body grew stronger. Honestly, I was so exhausted with everything that had happened, tired of having to prove my capacity, tired of defending myself against the people I loved, and especially tired of facing Ryan. Ryan, my son. That name now felt like a knife cutting into my heart every time I thought of it. He stood there, silent, not looking at me. His gaze was as cold as ice, devoid of any emotion. How many times had I tried to make him understand, to make him realize that my love for him was unconditional? But all those attempts seemed futile. He was no longer the person I once knew. He was no longer the child I used to comfort and care for. He had changed, and there was nothing I could do to change that. Tasha stood beside Ryan, her posture full of self-satisfaction, as if the victory was already hers. She looked at me, but not with pity. She looked at me with disdain, with pride, as though she had succeeded in turning Ryan against me. She had pulled him away from me. And now, I had to face the painful truth that my son had become someone I no longer recognized. Everything inside me seemed to shatter. I had dedicated my entire life to raising Ryan, protecting him from all of life's hardships. Yet now, he stood with Tasha. How could I accept that? How could I face the truth that all my sacrifices, everything I had done for him, now meant nothing? How could I stand here and see my son, the one I had loved unconditionally, become a stranger in the very home we built together? This feeling, the feeling of having lost everything, of watching everything I once believed in crumble, made it impossible for me to stop. I wanted to stand up, to tell them how much I was hurting, but I couldn't. I knew that if I spoke, everything would only get worse. But my silence didn't free me from the pain. The judge, though silent, was watching my every move, every word. He didn't look at me with sympathy or respect. He looked at me as a defendant, someone facing judgment, with no regard for my feelings. Mrs. Thompson, if you cannot provide further clear evidence, we will proceed with what we have, he said, his voice cold and emotionless. I couldn't let that happen. Not because I had nothing left to protect, but because I couldn't let myself collapse in front of them. I had lived long enough to know that the truth was not always seen fairly, and I also knew that if I didn't stand up now, I would lose everything. I would lose Ryan, I would lose my family, and I would lose myself. I will fight, I said, my voice no longer weak. I will fight not for money or property, but for the love I have for this family, for everything I have given over the years. Every word I spoke felt like a declaration, like a statement that I would not give up. The room fell silent, everyone's gaze focused on me. I could feel a shift in the atmosphere. No more contemptuous stares, no more whispers. They were watching me, and I wasn't going to let them see me weak. Mom did everything she could, Ryan, I said, my voice cracking. But I couldn't stop. I've spent my whole life raising you. But now you're standing with Tasha. I don't understand. I can't understand why you're doing this. Tasha looked at me, but didn't say a word. She just stood there, with a smug look, as if I were a loser, someone who had no value. But I couldn't let her win. I wasn't going to let Tasha destroy my family. I wasn't going to let her make Ryan forget everything I had done for him. Ryan remained silent, but I knew that, in his heart, something was stirring. He couldn't completely ignore what I had said. He couldn't entirely shut me out, even if he didn't speak. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't his enemy, that I was his mother. I had loved him, I had cared for him, and I wouldn't give up on him just because of a misunderstanding or a fight with no way out. Tasha, I turned to her, my voice firmer than ever. You can pull Ryan away from me, But you can't take away the love I have for my son. You can't change the truth that I am his mother." Tasha said nothing, but I knew that she was feeling the challenge in my words. I wasn't someone who could be easily defeated. I couldn't let her control my life or Ryan's. I had fought my whole life to protect this family, and I wasn't going to stop now. The judge finally spoke again. "Mrs. Thompson, we will continue the trial tomorrow. By then, you need to prepare the necessary documents." His voice was cold, but I didn't feel fear anymore. I had spoken my truth. I had said that I wouldn't give up, and I would continue to fight. When the trial ended, I walked out of the courtroom with a different feeling. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel victorious, but I felt stronger. I had said what I needed to say. I had stood up for myself. And even if Ryan turned his back on me, I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let the wounds inside me make me fall. That morning, I woke up in the silent stillness of the house. There was no sound of Ryan's hurried footsteps, no laughter from him, no gentle calls from the kitchen. Everything seemed to have vanished. I sat up, feeling a sharp headache cutting through my veins, my body trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't escape. Even though I was awake, I couldn't shake off this nightmare. The past few days, I hadn't been able to sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, memories of Ryan, our old conversations, the words of love he once gave me, would appear so clearly. The look in his eyes had changed now. The indifference and alienation in his gaze made my heart ache. How could I face the truth that my son, the one I had loved for so many years, had now turned his back on me? How could I endure when the person I had sacrificed my entire life for no longer recognized my love and devotion? Tasha remained an unavoidable shadow in my life. Every time I thought of her, a surge of anger rose within me. She wasn't just the one who had broken my family. She was the one who had made Ryan turn against me. Every look she gave me, every word she said, made me feel like a loser, like someone who no longer had a place in her son's life. She had succeeded in pulling Ryan away from me, making him a stranger to the love I had given him. And I couldn't forgive her for that. This feeling, this helplessness, was suffocating me. I had given my whole life to this family, to Ryan. Every moment spent with him was a sacrifice. But now, all I received in return was coldness, a betrayal I couldn't accept. Ryan no longer looked at me, no longer called me Mom. He wasn't the son I once loved. The years I had spent with him now felt like sad memories, wounds that hadn't healed. My steps felt heavy as I left the room, walked downstairs to the kitchen to prepare for a new day. Everything was the same, but I couldn't feel the joy. I did the familiar tasks, brewing coffee, organizing things, but everything felt dull, meaningless. I was like a lost shadow in my own home. Thoughts of Ryan kept swirling in my mind. Why did he do this? Why did he turn his back on me? That question repeated endlessly, but there was no answer. What had I done wrong? I had spent my whole life raising him, protecting him from suffering. But now, I couldn't understand him anymore. He was no longer the son I once knew. He had changed. Suddenly, I remembered the first times Ryan said words of love. He was always the son I could be proud of. I remembered when he was little, when we walked through the park together, when he held my hand and said, "Mom, I love you." At that moment, I felt like the happiest woman in the world because I had a son who loved me. But now, those words were gone, and I felt like a stranger in my own family. I sat down at the dining table, my hands gripping the coffee cup, but I couldn't feel its warmth. I only felt the coldness of the house, the distance from Ryan and Tasha. I could clearly see that everything had changed. I was no longer the mother Ryan loved, and that, something I couldn't accept, made me feel like I had lost everything. But I couldn't give up, even though I was in pain, even though I felt like I had failed. I couldn't let everything I had done for this family become meaningless. I had to stand up, because I wasn't just fighting for myself, but for Ryan, for this family. I couldn't let this betrayal destroy everything I had sacrificed. I wouldn't let Tasha win. I wouldn't let Ryan forget the love I had given him. I decided to meet lawyer Martin. I couldn't continue living in this pain. I needed a plan, a clear goal to continue the fight. I couldn't let myself drown in despair. Martin was the only one I could trust right now. He was the only one who could help me get everything back on track. When I walked into Martin's office, I felt like a stranger. I was no longer myself. The loss, the betrayal from Ryan had made me unrecognizable. I wasn't the proud mother I used to be, but I couldn't let myself fall. I had to fight, because I knew no one else could help me but myself. "Maggie, we need to prepare more evidence," Martin said as I sat across from him. "You'll need clear documents to prove that you still have the capacity to make decisions about your life. We can't let Tasha and Ryan win so easily." I nodded, trying to calm myself. "I know, Martin. I will do everything I can, but not just for me, but for Ryan. I can't let him live in indifference and coldness. I can't let everything I've sacrificed become meaningless." Martin looked at me with eyes full of determination. "That's right, Maggie. We will fight. And you have to remember that you are not alone in this fight." I felt a slight comfort in his words. While I couldn't change the past, at least I could do something to protect myself. I couldn't let this betrayal take over my life. I couldn't give up. When I walked out of Martin's office, I felt a little relief. There was still so much to do, but I knew I had a clear goal now. I would fight not just for money or my rights, but for the love I had for my family, for Ryan. The tension in the courtroom that day felt like an approaching storm. Everything seemed to slow down, as if time was no longer something tangible, but rather something vague, passing very slowly, as if it was waiting for something decisive to happen. And I could feel it very clearly. That something was the confrontation between me and the people I had loved most in my life. A battle not just for property, but for honor, love, and my right to live. I walked into the courtroom, but it felt as if I were stepping into an arena. Every eye in the room was on me. The light from the ceiling lamps didn't make me feel warm. On the contrary, it only made the space feel colder than ever. Everything around me seemed to blur, and the only thing that was clear was that I had to face my own son, the one I had spent my whole life nurturing and loving. Ryan, my son, stood there, still silent. He didn't look at me, and there was no expression on his face. His eyes didn't carry any love, any concern, only indifference. That feeling hit me like a sharp knife to the heart. I wanted to call his name, to tell him that I still loved him, that I couldn't give up on him, but every word got stuck in my throat. How could I face the change in my son? How could I accept that the person I had loved for so many years had now turned his back on me? Tasha stood next to Ryan, her posture smug, as though victory was already in her hands. She looked at me, but not with pity. She looked at me with contempt, as if I were someone unworthy of being here. I couldn't stand her gaze. Tasha was not the person I had imagined. She had entered my life with a smile, and I had welcomed her as a daughter-in-law, hoping she would love and care for Ryan as I had. But she didn't just betray me. She made Ryan forget the love and sacrifice I had given him. I couldn't forgive her for that. And I couldn't forgive Ryan, who had sided with her. I sat down in the courtroom chair, the papers full of text on the table in front of me. Couldn't ease the pain in my heart. They couldn't make me forget what had happened. Couldn't make me forget the betrayal I was enduring. The judge continued asking questions, but I couldn't hear his words clearly. Everything seemed to fade into the background. I only knew that I had to speak the truth, to protect what I had spent my life building. Mrs. Thompson, can you provide any further evidence of your ability to make decisions? The judge asked again, his eyes never leaving me. His words felt like another stab to my heart, but I couldn't let myself crumble. I had stood firm for so many years, and I wouldn't let this betrayal defeat me. Tasha stood silently beside Ryan, but I knew she was feeling victorious. She didn't need to say anything. She had won in her eyes, and she wanted me to feel it. But I wouldn't let her win. I wouldn't let her take away everything I had given to Ryan. Mrs. Thompson, if you cannot prove your capacity, we will proceed with what we have, the judge continued, his tone firm. Everything in the courtroom seemed to slow down, and I could feel the tension in the air. But I couldn't give up. I had fought my whole life to keep this family, to protect Ryan, and I wouldn't let everything I had done become meaningless. I took a deep breath and looked directly into the judge's eyes. I will not let this betrayal destroy me, I said, my voice firm, even though my heart was still filled with pain. I will fight for what I've given, and for my son. I will not let Tasha and Ryan win. The judge looked at me for a long time, then turned to the lawyers and continued with the trial. I felt like I had just declared war on the pain inside me. I knew I couldn't change the past, but I could fight to protect what was left. And that's why I was still sitting there, still determined to defend my right to make decisions, even though I knew I was facing an unpredictable storm. Ryan remained silent, saying nothing, but his gaze in the end couldn't avoid me. Even though he no longer looked at me with the love he once had, I could still sense that a part of him held on to the old memories, the memories of the love I had given him. Maybe he didn't realize it immediately, but I believed that one day he would understand. He would understand that I was always his mother, and my love for him would never change. Tasha said nothing, but she still stood there, as if she had won. I could feel her smugness in every movement, but I knew she couldn't defeat me. Even if Ryan turned his back on me, I would still be the one who won this battle. Because I wasn't fighting for money or personal gain. I was fighting for family, for Ryan, for the love I had given him. Finally, when the trial was over, I walked out of the courtroom, feeling like I had just gone through a battle that was anything but easy. But I didn't feel defeated. On the contrary, I felt like I had done the right thing. I hadn't given up. I had said everything I needed to say. And even if Ryan turned his back on me, even if Tasha continued to stand by him, I wouldn't give up. I wouldn't let this family fall apart any further. That day, I walked into my house with the feeling that I had been through an endless battle. After the trial, Everything inside me was no longer intact. I couldn't say I had won, because the price I had paid was too high, but at least I had stood my ground. However, the pain and disappointment still refused to leave me. I walked through the living room, the place where we had shared so many springs and winters together, and now it was filled only with silence. Everything looked the same, yet different. The feeling was indescribable, as if the house had changed, as if I had changed. I sat down on the couch, my eyes weary as I looked around at the old family photos hanging on the walls. Each photo felt like a part of my life, moments I'd tried to protect and preserve. But now, they seemed like faded memories, like shards of a past that could never return. I looked at the only photo left of me and Ryan, taken during a trip 10 years ago, when he was still a child. Looking at that photo, I couldn't stop crying. The tears kept falling, as if all the pain, all the disappointments, all the sacrifices of the years had erupted in a single moment. How could I accept that the son I had loved most, the one I had dedicated my life to, had now turned his back on me? I picked up the photo, gazing at Ryan's smiling face when he was a naive little boy, without a care in the world. I remembered those days when he was small, when I taught him to take his first steps in life. He used to look at me with eyes full of trust, and I knew that no matter what happened, I would always be there for him. But now, everything had changed. That look was no longer there. Ryan was no longer my son. He had become someone I didn't recognize. And Tasha, she was behind it all. She had deceived me, taken away what I held most dear. She didn't just destroy my family, she made me lose my son. She made Ryan forget everything I had done for him and made him side with her. This feeling, this betrayal, I could never forget. She had no compassion for me, and I could never forgive her. Never. I looked at the empty chair across from me, where Ryan used to sit every evening, where we shared so many conversations. This house was no longer the place where I found peace. It had become a place filled with painful memories. Every corner of the room, every object, reminded me of the past, of the days when Ryan and I were still a family. But now, everything had changed, and I couldn't change that. Dark thoughts continued to overwhelm me, but I knew I couldn't let them take over. I couldn't let this pain control my life. I had to rise. No matter how difficult, I had to find strength within myself, because I couldn't live in this resentment for the rest of my life. I had to continue fighting, not just for me, but for Ryan, because I couldn't let him live in this coldness and indifference. I had to do something, not just to protect myself, but to save my family, to save my son. I stood up and walked toward my desk. I looked at the documents I had prepared for the trial. The papers, the evidence, they were all important, but deep down, I knew that it wasn't just the documents that would help me win. The most important thing was to keep my faith in myself, in everything I had done. I couldn't let this betrayal erase all the sacrifices, all the efforts I had made. I had done right. I had loved Ryan, and I would not give up on him. I looked at the papers, my hands trembling as I picked them up. Each sheet, each piece of evidence, felt like I was facing decisions from the past, everything I had done for this family. I couldn't change the past, but I could do what I could to protect what was left. I couldn't let Ryan get lost. I couldn't let Tasha continue to destroy this family. When I finished preparing the documents, I decided to do something I had avoided for so long. I would write a letter. not just because I wanted to pour out my feelings, but because I needed to say everything I felt about Ryan, about the love I had for him. I needed to tell him that I hadn't given up, that I wouldn't let him live in this coldness and indifference. No matter what he did, I would still love him, and I would continue fighting to regain that love, to save him from this lost path. My dear son, I love you, I wrote, my hand shaking as I wrote these words. I have done everything for you. I have sacrificed so much for you to grow, for you to have a good life. I can't change you, but I will never give up on you. I still love you, no matter what you do. When I finished writing the letter, I felt a sense of relief, not because I thought Ryan would read it, but because I had stopped holding it all in. I had said everything I couldn't say for so many years. I hadn't let those emotions consume me anymore. This letter wasn't just an apology or a plea from me, but a declaration that my love for my son would never change. I placed the letter on the table and looked at the old family photo. The memories of happier times flooded back to me, but I didn't let those memories make me fall. I had to stand up. I had to move forward, not for me, but for my family, for Ryan. I stepped outside and stood looking at my home. It was still the same, still the house I had built, where all the memories, all the love I had given, resided. And I wouldn't let anyone take what was left of me. I had fought too long to give up. After everything, the battle was not just about what I had lost, but about what I still had. Life is never easy, especially when facing those we love most. The pain from the betrayal of Ryan and Tasha cannot be erased, but I have learned how to rise again, how to accept the truth, and continue living for myself. I fought not only to regain my right to make decisions, but also to preserve the love, self-respect, and the values I had given to my family. Looking back, I understand that healing is not an easy ending. Healing is a journey, a process full of small steps, but they are just as important. And I have begun that journey. A journey not for revenge, but to find myself again, to face the past and continue with hope for the future. I cannot change what has happened, but I can choose how to live on, how to face the wounds and learn to make them no longer hurt. This life is full of challenges, but it is through these challenges that we discover the strength within ourselves. And I, Maggie Thompson, have found that strength. The strength does not come from revenge or winning a battle. That strength comes from love, from forgiveness, and from the resilience that never gives up. If you are going through a difficult journey, a fight you never wanted to join, remember, you are not alone. We all carry wounds in our hearts, but it is these wounds that teach us how to love ourselves and become strong enough to overcome. Don't let what has happened make you fall, because everyone deserves a chance to heal and find joy in life again. Share your story in the comments. You're not just sharing with me, but with others who are also on their journey to find themselves. Let me know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to continue following healing stories like this.